Hi, it's Tom with a follow-up look at Kingdom Come Deliverance on PC. Alright, we've seen it on all 4 consoles, and while Xbox One X comes out on top there, the fact is there's still a lot of compromise in that best case. Frame rates dip to the low 20 FPS region on all console versions, with long initial loading times and abundant pop-in across the board. But playing on PC solves a huge number of those problems, provided you have the right graphics card. Clearly this is the version developer Warhorse Studios built first, before pushing it onto more CPU limited console hardware, and it really shows on PC's max settings. First off, I will say that the console loading time problem is completely solved. Here's a reminder of what that initial load is like on all 4 consoles, taking a staggering amount of time before even getting to the main menu on PS4, though Xbox One X does win out at 53 seconds. Jumping to PC though, I quickly realised how lopsided the competition really is in this respect. So here we go on its own, booting the game from Steam on a solid state drive. We're talking a matter of moments before the loading marker goes away. Blink and you'll miss it, within 1 second you're at the front end menu. Now from there it does take 5 seconds to actually load a save game to the opening village, but again that's a huge saver on the 28 second wait on an Xbox One X or 44 on base PS4. Problem 1 fixed then. Now we'll get to performance later in this video, but first it's worth showing what the PC version can do visually. In the menus you can go all out with an ultra high preset and tweak the draw distance sliders however you like. Indeed, Kingdom Come has built notoriety already for being extremely demanding on both CPUs and GPUs. A big part of this is down to the technology it's using. Built on CryEngine 3.8.6, already known for thriving on the excesses of PC hardware, it's the first engine to push a game of this open-ended scale. Homefront: The Revolution is the closest to it in this open world design perhaps, but Kingdom Come goes much further with its dense forests and complex AI-driven cities. Actually, I got into contact with the studio's lead programmer, Tomas Blaho, who gave a fascinating insight into how this engine works. He describes the ultra high setting as a mode that's really only meant for future PC setups. This will tax even a mighty GTX 1080 Ti, as I've discovered, since it adds indoor shadow casting and several other taxing features. The PC version is also the first to use a newly tweaked global illumination system from Crytek, something I'll cover later. He also confirms that consoles like PS4 and Xbox One generally use PC's medium settings, though with a few tweaks. There's a lot more to it, but it explains why booting to the main title screen at medium settings gives the same low texture quality as console in the distance. With all that considered, even though it comes from a relatively small team, it's surprising how ambitious Kingdom Come is on a technical level. Running that ultra high preset at 1080p on an i5 8600K CPU with my Nvidia GTX 1080 Ti, playback struggles to lock at 60 FPS. Holding 60 is one of the biggest advantages of the PC version, and in this GPU's case, you can get there by dropping shadow, draw distances and lighting quality to high. But what do you exactly get visually in the best case that distinguishes it from that console medium setting? The first thing you'll notice is PC gets a unique and taxing form of dynamic indoor shadow casting. It only triggers at the game's top graphics setting actually, and so be warned, it makes performance tumble around interiors, sometimes more so than exteriors. It's a neat bonus and it uses any light source streaming through the windows to create a nice blended shadow. It's definitely a superfluous extra though, given the performance penalty. For most, dropping the shadow setting by 1 notch will dramatically boost your overall frame rate. Next, there's the volumetric effects, seen around taverns in particular, highlighting the dust streaming through the air. Again, it's a simple extra, but helps to add a sense of depth to the space between objects. This feature enables at the high setting or above on PC, so the PS4 Pro version here only just misses out by running at the medium preset. At this point, it's also worth mentioning the console version's default at the very lowest FOV setting of 60, whereas PC boots at 65 as standard, though obviously you can widen that however much you like. There's a huge swathe of improvements next to consoles besides that, whether it's the improved anti-aliasing, the sharper shadows, or textures that run up to 4 times the resolution of console assets, almost every aspect is touched on. One of the bigger changes is in lighting too. PC's high quality global illumination is standout. Unlike the cheaper voxel based mode used on console, PC's top lighting setting here enables SVOGI, a dynamic light bounce between objects that creates a beautiful diffused look. Previously dull areas now look brighter on PC, colours pop with a gentle bloom, and it ties into the ambient occlusion system too, giving a more realistic blanket of shade in between objects. Along with the shadow setting though, this ultra high lighting mode will tax your GPU, but unlike the shadow casting, it's a genuine standout feature and worth keeping if you can. Another of the more impressive enhancements on PC is parallax occlusion maps on the floor. This, in the most noticeable case, creates 3D definition to mud tracks and puddles. It looks fantastic, and by comparison to the flatter console version surfaces represented here by a PS4 Pro, PC is getting a much better representation of the world. Fortunately, you don't need to run at absolute top settings to get this either. The effect kicks in at the high setting upwards. Now there are a few small oddities in the way texture filtering works once this is enabled, and the floor can show a subtle warping effect as the effect comes into view. It's definitely worth it however, and for normal texture maps on PC, the texture filtering is also a huge leap over console. Last but not least is the improvement to draw distance. Okay, pop-in is still an issue, and while I haven't entirely maxed out the sliders, this is what the game looks like with the ultra high preset selected. For consistency, you may have noticed I've also locked the game to 30 FPS on this GTX 1080 Ti, just because a clean 60 wasn't possible. But you get the idea. Building detail and foliage have a much farther draw distance threshold, and looking at this shot, that applies to the shadowing in the woodlands too, where a PS4 Pro for example looks bare by comparison. It won't eliminate the pop-in entirely, but certainly at the higher resolutions possible on PC, it's minimized. It's all positive for PC users then, but the performance aspect is a little more sobering. Running at 1080p with ultra high settings, even on this GTX 1080 Ti, it's difficult to hold 60 FPS at all, especially in cities where you get drops to 35 FPS. If you want all these peak settings, the only option really is to go with a 30 FPS cap. Now this is something you have to sort yourself since there's no in-game option, but it's not too tricky. It also lets you adjust many other game settings not available in the official menus. Just find the game's install directory in Steam, make a duplicate of the system config file, and from there rename that copied file user.cfg. Now open that in Notepad and delete all its contents and add the line sys max fps equals 30, save, and that's your 30 FPS cap enabled. But you can do all sorts of things here, like adjust anti-aliasing quality or ambient occlusion, and lots more besides. This actually avoids the 31 FPS glitch we see on consoles, and the frame times are evenly paced during gameplay. Either way, if you're going with a gamepad, this is still a decent way to get the PC's top visual settings. Now obviously, ultra high quality just isn't in the running for more affordable GPUs. Realistically, high quality is where the real contest is, between enthusiast cards like the GTX 1060 and AMD's RX 580. This is running as before with an i5 8600K CPU. Now I've based all my benchmarks on the latest game build 1.2.5 with the most up-to-date drivers as of publishing this video. We're going for 1080p on each of these cards at the high general preset, just above console, with FOV set to 65 as well. This way we qualify for those lovely parallax occlusion maps and a few other PC only effects, but clearly getting 60 FPS as well would be ideal here. The turnout? No question there's a big advantage on the RX 580, and you're looking at a divide of around 8 to 10 frames per second between the two across the run of tests. Whether that's a run down the initial village or a rapid chase on horseback, AMD's card comes out on top. Put into numbers on this high setting, the GTX 1060 averages at 57.6 FPS, while you get 66.3 FPS on average from the RX 580. It's a big difference, but ultimately the drops hit hardest around dense city areas and a walk through a castle barracks at night especially. This dark scene really strains both cards and shows that really 60 FPS locked is far out of reach. At lowest, the GTX 1060 plummets to 25 FPS here, just as we turn to see all those NPCs. Nvidia's card just isn't good enough even for a 30 FPS cap, though the RX 580 just about squeezes through with a nadir of 32 FPS. This really is the worst case I've found however, and it's interesting to note that, despite the AMD card putting in the better performance overall, it's also hammering the CPU cores much harder than the Nvidia card. In fact, one of the threads hits 100% continually throughout the sequence, and also a run through the city centre, something that isn't so much an issue on the GTX 1060. Again, it's another CryEngine game that shows that if you have an AMD card especially, you will need to back it with a very proficient CPU, but the results overall are undeniably better. Actually, I again asked the game's lead programmer about why this single thread is hitting 100%. In his words, he explains it quite clearly. Crytek have a main thread and a render thread that are the most demanding. Usually one of them is the bottleneck, 100%, and the other is waiting a bit. There is also a job system on the other CPU cores where many rendering, simulation and AI tasks are offloaded, but those are hardly ever utilized as much as the main and render threads, especially on fast PC CPU cores. So there you have it, straight from the developer himself. The engine demands very high clock CPUs, if only for the one thread that needs it. Unfortunately, the turnout for our GTX 1060 and RX 580 test here with our 8600K at stock clocks is that 60 FPS just isn't doable, at least on the high setting. One way to mitigate that situation is to drop settings, especially for draw distance and physics, to minimize CPU load a bit. So as a straight demonstration of that, let's knock the general preset to the console level medium setting to see if we can hold 60 FPS on these cards. Now this is much more like it. At medium, a lot of the time we've got plenty of performance overhead to get away with a 60 FPS lock. Even cities run smoothly with few signs of dipping below that line. The averages are very similar to the high test too, and AMD wins out. Put in perspective, our GTX 1060 gets an average of 71.1 FPS overall, next to the 82.6 FPS on the RX 580. Again, the margin between the two is roughly the same as our high test, but the results are boosted to a point where you could happily play with a cap at 60 here, at least for most areas. Unfortunately, the Nvidia card does show up some glaring drops in the worst cases. If we again look at that taxing barracks walk at night, the lowest result on the GTX 1060 is 46 FPS, next to the 57 FPS on the RX 580. It's a sign that the AMD card could perceptibly push to a locked 60 FPS across the game as a whole, with only a few hitches. Trying the same on its rival? Well, expect most of it to run at 60, though with a few clear trouble spots. There's a lot going into this world, and tweaking the draw distance setting is arguably the best way to limit those drops. In a sense, even with an expensive PC then, 30 FPS may still be an unavoidable reality for players looking to get the most out of its visuals. Either way, that puts the game's launch date on PC into perspective. There are some big positives here though. From performance to pop-in to loading times, the PC version of Kingdom Come Deliverance gives a suite of options to step up the experience over console. Clearly, it's not an engine that takes easily to most PC setups though, and be warned, you'll need a premium end card to really see its best features. Anyway, that'll do from me. If you found this analysis useful in any way, do let me know with a like or subscribe. The source file to this video, as ever, can be found on our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net. But until next time, thanks for watching.